Donald Trump was about to accept Jesus, but a strange voice stopped him. Before we move forward, kindly hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell icon to get notifications from us. The revival tent loomed large on the edge of Marlow, Texas, a town where Main Street still had a diner, a feed store, and a single traffic light that hadn't worked since 2002. It was the kind of place where folks gathered on Sunday nights not just for worship but for spectacle, and tonight's revival promised both. The tent had been pitched in a dry patch of pasture behind Pastor Silas Callahan's modest white chapel, now flanked with trucks, folding chairs, and curious townsfolk eager for miracles, or at least a good show. The air buzzed with cicadas, and the dusk was painted in deep orange. Inside the tent, heat and holy fervor mingled like smoke. Fans beat rhythmically in the hands of church ladies, and the scent of fried catfish and sweat lingered in the still air. Pastor Callahan, a barrel-chested man with a voice that could shake the rafters, paced the stage in a sweat-darkened button-up, Bible clenched in hand. He thundered about redemption, about being washed clean in the blood, and about America needing a heart transplant more than a tax cut. The crowd hollered and amens bounced like marbles off the tent poles. In the very back row, nearly hidden beneath the shadow of a support beam, sat a man who didn't belong. Baseball cap pulled low, sunglasses still on despite the fading sun, he was dressed in jeans and a flannel, trying too hard to look ordinary. But there was nothing ordinary about him. Some folks glanced his way, their stares lingering a second too long, a whisper too loud. He sat stiff, like a man at a poker table with a bad hand but too much pride to fold. It was Donald Trump. Nobody had expected to see him in Marlow, and certainly not under a tent on a plastic folding chair with no Secret Service in sight. But there he was, watching, listening. He'd been traveling, quietly, under the radar, since his exit from the political stage. Maybe he was searching for something. Maybe he didn't know what. But something about the flyer nailed to a gas station corkboard had pulled him here. Revival tonight, let the fire fall. He'd scoffed at first, then folded it into his coat pocket. Now, as Pastor Callahan launched into a crescendo about rebirth and renewal, about the broken being made whole, Trump's eyes began to burn. Not from the sweat or the heat. From something deeper. He could feel it, a pull, a nudge in the chest. A sensation he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Was it conviction? Humility? The words weren't familiar anymore. And then came the call. If you're lost, if you've been wandering, if you've sinned but still got breath in your lungs, come. Come now, the preacher cried, voice ragged and arms outstretched. Come and let the Lord do what no man can. Something inside him broke loose. Trump stood. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People turned. Eyes widened. A few mouths fell open. The music shifted, softer now, as if even the piano knew something strange was about to happen. Step by step, he walked down the center aisle. The floorboards creaked. Pastor Callahan froze, his mouth slightly open. But before Trump could reach the pulpit, a boy, maybe 10 years old, freckled, with a dusty baseball cap too big for his head, stepped out from the front pew and blocked his path. Small, wiry, and barefoot, the boy looked up at the towering man before him and whispered, not with fear, but with eerie calm, "He doesn't want your kind of salvation." The tent fell utterly silent. And then, the boy lifted his hand and said something else, words so jarring, so impossible, they would echo through Marlow for decades. The silence inside the revival tent was unnatural. Even the cicadas outside seemed to pause, as if they too had sensed the gravity of the moment. Every eye was locked on the boy with the dusty cap and the man who used to command nations. Donald Trump stood frozen mid-step, his hand half-raised as if reaching for something unseen. The boy's whisper had landed like a slap in a cathedral, sacrilegious, surreal, impossible. And then the boy spoke again. His voice rang clear this time, louder and sharper, slicing through the heavy air, "You're not the chosen one. You're the test." Gasps shot through the congregation like sparks on dry grass. Mrs. Eileen Hartman clutched her pearls. Two men in camo jackets looked at each other, mouths agape. A woman whispered, "Did he just?" and couldn't finish. Pastor Callahan took a step forward, Bible still clenched but his voice gone. For the first time in his decades of preaching, he didn't know what to say. Trump blinked. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "What did you say, kid?" he asked, his voice brittle but composed. "What kind of game are you playing?" The boy didn't flinch. He looked up into the former president's face with eyes far too knowing for a child. "I ain't playing," he said, his southern accent faint but present. "He sent me. Told me to stand here. Said you'd come. Said not to let you take his name unless you understand the price." A murmur built like a low hum through the crowd. Some looked to Pastor Callahan for answers, but the preacher just shook his head slowly, sweat trickling down his temple. "What do you mean, he sent you?" Trump pressed, confusion now battling irritation on his face. The boy turned his head toward the crowd, his gaze sweeping over them as if weighing their hearts. "You think this is about saving one man? Nah. It's about testing many." He knew folks would follow the wrong light. Would worship power instead of truth. "You came here looking for a spotlight, Mr. Trump. But this tent ain't a stage. It's a mirror." At that, something cracked in the air, literal thunder in a sky that had been dry for days. A single flash of lightning streaked above the tent's canvas roof, followed by the first fat drop of rain. The silence turned into whispers, then murmurs, then rising voices. A woman near the front clutched her Bible and shouted, "That boy's possessed." Another yelled, "It's prophecy." Others cried out in confusion, demanding answers from the stunned pastor, who stood motionless, eyes locked on the boy. Trump, now visibly rattled, looked down at the child again. "You got no idea who I am, do you?" "I know exactly who you are," the boy replied calmly. "But the question is, do you?" More thunder. The tent flaps snapped in the wind like angry flags. A sudden gust blew through the space, sending pamphlets and paper fans tumbling. The revival had turned. People began to rise from their seats, some moving toward the exits, others stepping closer, trying to hear more. Pastor Callahan finally spoke, his voice raspy but loud. "Son, if this is a message from the Lord, you best explain it. This tent is a place of truth." The boy nodded. "It is. That's why he sent me to say this, beware the man who seeks redemption only after he's lost power. For he does not come to bow, he comes to reclaim his throne." It hit the crowd like a hammer. And in that moment, as the first heavy rain began to drum against the canvas roof, the boy stepped aside, not toward the pews, but toward the center aisle, turning his back to Trump. "Now you can walk," he said. "But know this, every step you take ain't just yours. It's ours. And he's watching." Trump didn't move. The boy disappeared into the crowd. And the revival, once about fire and forgiveness, had become something else entirely. The rain was supposed to pass through, just a quick Texas sprinkle, the kind that kicks up the scent of mesquite and vanishes before it soaks your socks. But this wasn't that kind of rain. It came down in sheets, thick and unrelenting, beating against the canvas roof of the revival tent like the fists of angels with a warning. People scrambled, pulling their children close, grabbing handbags, Bibles, and lawn chairs. Some dashed for the parking lot, soaked in seconds. Others stood frozen, staring not at the sky but at the space the boy had disappeared into, as if he'd taken something with him. A sense of order, maybe. Or safety. Trump stood exactly where the boy had left him, his flannel shirt darkened with water, hair plastered to his forehead. For a man who'd once owned golden towers and private jets, he looked very small now. Alone. Not humiliated, not angry, just still. He kept scanning the tent, like a man trying to find a way out of a maze where none had existed a moment ago. Pastor Callahan grabbed the mic, though the feedback screech told him the sound system was no match for this storm. "Folks, calm down," he called out, hand raised to the crowd. "We're safe. The tent is grounded. Let's not panic. Just stay put till this passes. But it didn't pass. 5 minutes in, the ground began to puddle. 10 minutes, and it turned to mud. 15, and streams of water ran through the aisles like veins. This wasn't a storm. It was a siege. And then something stranger happened. The revival sign outside the tent, wooden, hand-painted, anchored in concrete, toppled. No wind could have done that. It landed with a thud so loud the tent frame shuddered. The words, "Let the fire fall," split down the center, cracked by a force unseen. That's when the whispers began again. Did that boy call down a curse? Is this the end of days? It's judgment, I tell you. Judgment for that man standing there like he owns the altar. Trump turned slowly toward the crowd. He wasn't wet anymore. Not just wet, anyway, he was soaked, every inch of him dark and glistening under the flickering tent lights. He took a step forward. Not toward the preacher. Not toward the exit. But toward the very spot the boy had stood. And he dropped to his knees. Some gasped. Others groaned. One woman began praying in tongues. A man near the front cried out, "Don't do it, Mr. Trump. Not like this." But Trump raised his head, eyes shut tight against the rain now slipping through the seams of the canvas roof. "I came here looking for peace," he said, more to himself than the crowd. "And I found. I don't know what the hell I found." "Maybe it's not hell," came a voice behind him. He turned. It was an old man, wrinkled and wiry, with eyes like storm clouds and a wet cowboy hat drooping over his brow. "Maybe it's the truth. And maybe the truth don't come gift-wrapped in applause." Trump didn't answer. Instead, he looked around the tent. The preacher. The crowd. The broken sign outside. And the empty spot in the front pew. "Who is that boy?" he asked quietly. The old man narrowed his eyes. "Son, that's what the rest of us are fixin' to find out. But if you're still thinking this revival was ever about you, then you still ain't listening." Outside, the rain kept falling. And it didn't stop for the rest of the night. At first, it was just a drizzle. It whispered across the canvas roof like a secret, soft and steady, barely enough to distract from the stunned silence that had taken root in the tent. But then, as if summoned by the boy's final words, the sky tore open. A hard, unforgiving rain poured down in sheets, drumming on the tent like judgment from above. Within seconds, people were shouting, chairs screeching across the floor as families grabbed purses, Bibles, and babies. Pastor Callahan tried to hold it together, his southern preacher's voice echoing through the mic despite the static. "Stay calm, folks. The Lord ain't never harmed his own. Let's stay seated until the weather passes." But the weather wasn't listening. The storm raged like it had business with someone. The sides of the tent billowed dangerously, ropes pulling taut under the weight of wind. Outside, the churchyard turned to sludge. Cars in the field began to sink slightly into the mud. Water streamed down the tent poles and pooled in the corners, soaking pant legs and heels. Inside, ice kept darting between Trump and the boy's empty seat. The space where he had stood just moments before now looked ghostly, like something sacred, or cursed, had vanished. Trump stood unmoving. The rain had flattened his hair, smeared dirt across his flannel, and drenched his jeans until they clung to his legs. He looked nothing like the man from TV. Nothing like the man from the rallies. He looked like a man who had just been stripped bare, publicly, cosmically, spiritually. "I came here looking for peace," he said suddenly, loud enough for those nearby to hear. His voice cracked with something rare, confusion. "I thought maybe I'd hear something that made sense. Maybe even something real." A few murmurs answered, unsure whether to support or condemn him. Pastor Callahan, for all his bravado earlier, now stood like a statue behind his pulpit. His mouth was parted slightly, but no words came. It was as if he too felt the weight of something far bigger than the tent could hold. Then came the crack. Outside, the wooden "Revival Tonight" sign that had been planted for weeks snapped at its base. It didn't fall casually. It snapped, like a bone, like a verdict. The sign hit the mud with a thud that vibrated under their feet. Those close to the tent flaps saw it land face first, words down, truth buried. Some screamed. Some whispered prayers. And one woman collapsed into sobs. Trump, his hands now trembling at his sides, looked up at the ceiling of the tent where the rain hammered without mercy. "What is this?" he asked, not to the preacher, not to the people, but to something higher. Something unseen. That's when he dropped to his knees. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't theatrical. It was the kind of fall you make when your body gives out before your mind. His knees hit the ground with a splash, mud soaking through his jeans. He bowed his head as if waiting for lightning, waiting for punishment, or permission. "I don't know what I'm doing," he muttered, eyes shut tight. "I don't even know who I am anymore." Then came a different voice, one neither booming nor ghostly, but calm and weathered. "Maybe that's the first honest thing you've said in years." Trump turned. Standing just a few feet away was a man in his 70s, skin like leather, boots caked in red clay. He wore a drenched cowboy hat and held a beat-up Bible under one arm. His eyes were sharp. Kind, but sharp. "Name's Eli," the old man said. "And I've seen storms. But this? This is the kind that don't just flood land. This one floods souls." Trump looked down at his hands, mudslick and shaking. "And what's it trying to drown?" he asked. Eli didn't answer. Instead, he pointed toward the boy's empty spot. "You want real salvation? You don't find it at the altar. You find it where you fell. But first, you've got to know who sent the storm." Outside, the rain poured like the heavens were trying to wash the whole world clean. And inside, something in Trump's chest finally cracked open. By morning, Marlow looked like a different town. The sun was out, bold and brassy, as if nothing had happened. But the streets were coated in a thin layer of mud, puddles shimmered like oil slicks, and the town's only diner, Betty's Griddle, was packed with folks who'd spent the night swapping theories over soggy fries and lukewarm coffee. Nobody had slept well. Not after that storm. Not after that boy. Betty herself, a no-nonsense woman who hadn't closed her diner for a single day in 23 years, not even during that one tornado warning, stood behind the counter with a dish rag in hand, listening more than she was pouring. Pastor Callahan sat at his usual window booth, stirring his coffee like it held prophecies. And then there was Donald Trump, back in a new flannel, hair still damp, sitting alone at the corner table by the back door. He didn't speak. He just watched. Watched people lean in close, whisper behind their hands, point when they thought he wasn't looking. But he was always looking. Always had been. That morning, though, his stare held something different, less fire, more fog. Like a man trying to make sense of a dream that didn't end when he woke up. Then the bell over the door rang. A man entered, tall and pale with a face too sharp for comfort and sunglasses that stayed on despite the morning light. His boots made no sound on the tile floor. Nobody seemed to recognize him, but everyone noticed him. Especially Trump. The stranger walked straight to Trump's table and sat without asking. "Still raining where you are?" he asked, smooth as molasses but with an edge that felt like glass. Trump blinked. "Who are you?" The man didn't smile, but he looked amused. "Let's say I work in interpretation." "What does that mean?" "It means I know what happened last night wasn't about theatrics. Or weather. Or politics. It was about doors. Some opening. Some closing." Trump narrowed his eyes. "That kid, who was he?" The stranger leaned back, tapping a long finger against the salt shaker. "You ever read the old book?" "I've had it read to me," Trump muttered. "Well," the stranger said, "there are messengers. Prophets. Disruptors. They don't always show up in ways that make sense. Sometimes it's burning bushes. Sometimes it's a whisper in the dark. And sometimes, it's a boy in a baseball cap who tells a king he's not the king. You're saying God sent him? Trump asked, his voice low. I'm saying he sends who he pleases, the stranger replied. And not everyone likes the message. Trump's hands clenched under the table. Why now? Why me? The stranger finally smiled, and it wasn't comforting. Because redemption offered too late is sometimes a test, for others. Maybe for all of us. The question isn't what you believe. It's what your belief costs the people who follow you. Before Trump could respond, the stranger stood. One more thing, he said. The boy's not finished. He turned and walked out, leaving no footprints in the drying mud. At the counter, Betty crossed herself. She didn't know why. Back at his table, Trump stared at his reflection in the spoon. And for the first time in decades, he didn't recognize the man looking back. The next night, the revival tent sat eerily quiet, a ghost of its former self. Half the chairs had been taken down. Pastor Callahan hadn't scheduled another sermon. Most folks assumed it was over. The storm had been too much. The boy's words, even more. What had started as a spiritual celebration now felt like unfinished business, raw and open like a wound. Still, a few diehards lingered. Some came to pray. Others came to gawk. A few just wanted answers. Trump, to the surprise of many, was one of them. He arrived alone, again, this time in a white t-shirt and jeans that didn't quite fit. His eyes were sunken, sleepless. His swagger had been replaced with something hesitant, almost humble. He walked the perimeter of the tent slowly, scanning every corner as if expecting the boy to pop out like some biblical jack-in-the-box. But the boy wasn't there. Not yet. Pastor Callahan watched from the edge of the pulpit. He hadn't preached since the storm. He wasn't even sure if he could. Something about that night had shaken him to the core. Not because of the politics, he'd seen plenty of that, but because deep down, he'd felt it too, the shift in the air, the weight of the moment, the sense that God had shown up in a form no one had expected. And then it happened. Just as the last of the evening sun slipped below the horizon, a figure appeared at the far end of the field. Small. Walking barefoot. Wearing the same dusty baseball cap. The boy. He moved calmly, like he'd never left, like he hadn't shattered the town's psyche with a few well-placed words. He walked straight down the center aisle of the tent, no hesitation, no fear, and stopped right in front of Trump, who stood frozen under the soft yellow glow of the revival lights. You came back, Trump said. You stayed, the boy replied. A pause. I didn't get your name, Trump muttered. You don't need it, the boy said. You just need to listen. Trump looked around. Everyone's listening. That's kind of the problem. The boy tilted his head. They were listening before. But not to him. They were listening to you. Now they don't know what to believe. Trump swallowed. And what am I supposed to say? The boy stepped closer, just enough to lower his voice into something soft and sharp. The truth. All of it. Even the ugly parts. Especially the parts where you were wrong. Trump winced. That's not exactly how the game is played. This ain't a game, the boy snapped, the first flicker of fire in his voice. And it's not about saving face. It's about saving souls. That silenced the tent again. Somewhere in the back, a child cried. A woman whispered a prayer. Pastor Callahan gripped the edge of the pulpit like it was the only thing keeping him standing. Trump looked at the boy, really looked, and for a second he saw something impossible, eyes that looked ancient. Eyes that had seen too much. Eyes that weren't just reflecting him, but reading him. Why me? Trump asked. There are better men. Better preachers. People who actually believe. You were chosen, the boy said simply. Not because you're good. But because you're loud. Trump stared, unblinking. And because people follow you, the boy continued. Even when they shouldn't. He turned to go. Wait, Trump called out. What now? The boy didn't stop walking. Now, he said over his shoulder, his voice fading into the night. Now you decide who you really are. Before the next storm comes. And just like that, he vanished into the shadows beyond the tent. The town of Marlow had seen its share of strange days, tornado warnings that never landed, wildfires stopped by sudden rain, even that one time a cow gave birth to twins with identical heart-shaped spots, but nothing like this. Nothing like the boy. Nothing like Donald Trump showing up in flannel at a revival and getting verbally checked by a barefoot kid with biblical vibes. And now, something was shifting. Not just the weather, though the skies had stayed cloudy ever since. Not just in the churches, though pews were fuller than usual. It was in the people. Conversations at Betty's Griddle turned softer, more thoughtful. Men who usually argued politics in front of their kids now spoke in lowered voices. And everywhere, from the grocery store to the gas station, someone was saying the same thing. Did you hear what he said? But nobody ever agreed on what the boy had said. Some insisted he was a prophet. Others said he was possessed. A few called him a plant, a stunt. A couple of old-timers whispered about the end times, and teenagers started making TikToks titled #BoyInTheCap. One video zoomed in on the boy's face just before he spoke the words, "You're not the chosen one." It had over 2 million views in 3 days. And through it all, Pastor Callahan sat in his office, blinds drawn, staring at his Bible like it had started speaking a different language. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had missed something big, something the boy had seen that he hadn't. Worse, he couldn't shake the sense that the revival hadn't ended, it had just turned inward. Now every mirror in town was a pulpit. He pulled out a notebook, one he hadn't written in since seminary. On the first clean page, he scribbled, "We wanted a king." Maybe what we needed was a mirror. Across town, at the Marlow Community Library, Mrs. Ennis, the 72-year-old librarian who never let children touch the good encyclopedias, found herself watching YouTube clips of the revival on her tablet. She'd been there. She'd seen the boy. But in the videos, he looked different. More deliberate. She noticed how the wind had picked up right before he spoke. How the rain had waited until he turned his back. That boy wasn't natural, she whispered, clutching her cross. And yet, she couldn't look away. Meanwhile, Donald Trump had gone quiet. He hadn't left town, though he easily could have. The Secret Service must have been pulling their hair out wherever they were. But he'd holed up in a small rental house near the edge of town, the kind of place with chipping paint, a broken porch swing, and an American flag that had faded to almost pink. He spent most days walking. No cell phone. No press. Just miles of country road and silence. He didn't speak to anyone, not yet. But he watched. He watched the townspeople wrestle with what they'd seen. Watched the way their eyes now searched his for something other than fame. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't know if he liked what he saw. That night, thunder rolled again in the distance. It didn't rain. Not yet. But every porch light in town flickered at the same time. And every person awake looked toward the same stretch of road, just beyond the church. Because somewhere out there, they all felt it. The boy was coming back. Marlow had a way of holding its breath. The air just got heavy, thicker, slower. Like time itself was bracing for something. That's how it felt on the 7th night after the boy first spoke. The skies had turned from cotton cloud gray to bruised purple. Not a drop had fallen yet, but the storm was close. Everyone could feel it in their bones. Just outside the edge of town, past where the gravel turns to dirt and the dirt to tracks, sat the old Benson cornfield. It hadn't been harvested in over a decade. The stalks grew wild now, tall and tangled, more like a maze than a farm. Locals said it was haunted. Kids dared each other to run through it on Halloween. No one did. That night, something strange happened in the field. Just after 9 p.m., a flash of lightning split the sky, and didn't vanish. It stayed, suspended like a frozen bolt just above the corn, illuminating the field in a pale, ghostly glow. Birds scattered. Dogs barked. Lights flickered across town. Then came the sound. It wasn't thunder. It was singing. High. Sweet. Wordless. And underneath it, another sound, rustling. Something moving in the stalks. Not a creature. Not a machine. A person. Pastor Callahan was the first to arrive. He'd heard the singing from the back porch of the church. Without grabbing his keys, phone, or shoes, he sprinted into the night like a man possessed. Behind him, others followed. The whisper had spread, the boys in the field. By the time Trump showed up, the gravel road was packed with pickups and headlights. People stood at the edge of the cornfield like worshippers around a fire. Nobody dared enter. Until Trump did. Without a word, he stepped forward, pushing between the stalks. They bent around him like they knew who he was. The voices grew louder, now layered, angelic, and terrible all at once. It wasn't music. It wasn't human. It was something older than either. Then, the lightning flashed again, brighter this time, and there he was. The boy. Standing at the center of the field, arms outstretched, head back, cap still somehow on his head despite the wind now whipping in every direction. Trump stopped just short of him, panting, heart racing. "You came," the boy said, not opening his eyes. "You called," Trump answered, not realizing until after he'd said it how true that felt. The boy dropped his arms slowly, then turned. "Tell me what you saw in your dreams last night," he said. Trump blinked. "What makes you think I had dreams?" "Because they weren't yours," the boy said, voice calm. "They were sent." And suddenly, Trump remembered. The red door that wouldn't open. The mirror with no reflection. The sea of people with no faces. The voice that said, "You still think this is about you?" He stepped back. "What is this?" he asked. "What are you?" The boy stepped forward. "I'm not the answer," he said quietly. "I'm just the storm before the question." Another flash of lightning. The corn shimmered gold. The boy vanished. And in his place stood something even stranger, a mirror. Not a normal mirror. This one pulsed like it had a heartbeat. Trump stepped closer and saw himself, but not himself. A version of him that looked the same, but smiled differently. A version that scared him. From the edge of the field, Pastor Callahan cried out, "Don't look too long." But Trump couldn't stop. And the storm finally broke. The storm hit with a vengeance. Rain came sideways, slashing through the corn like knives. Thunder cracked so loud it made grown men flinch and babies cry back in town. But in the center of the field, Donald Trump didn't move. He stood locked in place, face inches from the strange mirror left behind by the boy, a mirror that showed not just his reflection, but a version of himself that he'd never met, and couldn't unsee. This version stared back at him with colder eyes. A smirk played on its lips, not unlike his own, but twisted. Not bold. Cruel. It was everything he had been accused of and more. This version had no remorse, no reflection behind the gaze. Just hunger. Power. Fire. Trump's breath caught in his throat. He raised a trembling hand toward the glass. The rain didn't touch the surface. Lightning flashed again, and the mirror smiled wider. Then it spoke. Not aloud. Inside his head. "This is who you become when you ignore the boy." He jerked back, heart pounding like a war drum. "No," Trump whispered, shaking his head. "That's not me." "That's not, but it was," the mirror answered. "And it will be again. Unless," Trump took another step back, eyes wide, chest heaving. "Unless what?" But the mirror didn't answer. It rippled once, then cracked, just a single fracture, like a fault line splitting across a world of glass. And in that line, he saw something else, the boy, standing in a burning field, watching the mirror crumble. And behind him, a crowd. Not people. Followers. Devotees. Faces blurred by flame and smoke. They were screaming, not in pain, but in worship. Worshipping him. The wrong him. Suddenly, the storm stopped. Just stopped. The wind vanished. The rain shut off like a faucet. The clouds above began to break, and for a few surreal moments, moonlight bathed the field in eerie calm. And the mirror was gone. No glass. No shards. Just wet earth and the faint scent of ozone. Trump staggered backward, hands in his hair, trying to steady himself. But the world tilted, not physically, but morally. He could feel it. Attention. A line drawn. At the edge of the cornfield, Pastor Callahan pushed his way through the stalks, soaked and breathless. "I warned you not to look," he said, voice ragged. "What was that?" Trump gasped. "A vision? A warning?" Callahan nodded grimly. "Both. And it wasn't meant for just you." Trump turned slowly, eyes bloodshot, lips trembling. "He said I was the test." Callahan nodded again. He was right. Silence fell between them. Then a new sound, the low rumble of cars approaching. Dozens of headlights cutting through the night, kicking up mud and dust. People from town. Maybe people from outside it now. Word had spread. They were coming not just to see the tent or the preacher, but to see him. To see what he would do next. Callahan put a hand on Trump's shoulder. "You've seen the truth. Now you have to choose which version of you walks out of this field." Trump looked back to the spot where the mirror had stood. Then he looked to the road, where the crowds were gathering once more. And he knew, this wasn't about redemption anymore. This was about direction. And the world was watching. By the time Trump and Pastor Callahan emerged from the cornfield, a crowd had already formed. Trucks lined both sides of the road like a convoy, headlights glowing in the early mist of dawn. Some folks had coffee in hand. Others held signs, handwritten, desperate, and wildly different. "He has changed. False prophet. America still believes." We saw the mirror too. And then there were the cameras. Reporters had arrived from Dallas, Houston, even one from D.C. The story had gone national, viral overnight. #Trump Revival trended. Conspiracy channels were spinning tales about portals, prophecies, and chosen ones. But none of that mattered to Trump right now. The only thing that mattered was the boy's words echoing in his head like thunder that never faded. "You're not the chosen one. You're the test." He walked to the center of the muddy clearing, still in the clothes he'd worn the night before, now caked in dirt and memory. Pastor Callahan stood to the side, silent but steady. He'd done his part. The rest was not his to shape. Someone shoved a mic toward Trump. "Mr. Trump, can you comment on the so-called miracle in the cornfield?" Another, "Is it true you saw an angel, or a demon?" A third, "Is this a new campaign? Are you trying to rebrand yourself as a prophet now?" He raised a hand, not to silence them, but to ask for their patience. Slowly, the questions died down. The cameras kept rolling. The eyes of America, once again, were on him. But this time, Trump didn't deliver a performance. He told the truth. "I came here looking for something," he said, voice hoarse, unfamiliar. "Not votes. Not cameras. Just, something real." A breeze stirred the field. "I've lived a life where applause was my oxygen. Where being right mattered more than being honest. Where power was a crown, not a responsibility. And it led me here, to a cornfield in Texas, talking to a boy who shouldn't have known my name, but did." He paused. "He showed me something. A version of myself I didn't want to see. A version too many of you already knew." Gasps from the crowd. A few phones lowered. Eyes widened. Was he confessing? And now, he continued, I'd been given a choice. Not just to change, but to choose who I am from this point forward. Not for votes. Not for legacy. But for truth. From the back of the crowd, someone shouted, Are you saying you're done with politics? Trump looked at them, eyes sharp but no longer hard. I'm saying maybe politics was never the point. Another silence followed. A heavy one. Then, from among the crowd, a single voice, small, childlike, cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. Then choose. Trump turned. There he was. The boy. Standing once again at the edge of the field, barefoot, baseball cap in place, eyes calm and infinite. You can walk back the way you came, the boy said, or take a new path. But one leads to the mirror. And one leads to the fire. Trump looked between the crowd and the boy. His past and his future. His reflection and his redemption. And then, he stepped off the road. Not toward the boy. Not toward the crowd. But into the field once more. Alone. Because some choices aren't for show. They're for the soul. Donald Trump disappeared into the cornfield as the sun cracked over the horizon, casting long golden fingers across the earth. No one followed. Not the reporters, not the townsfolk, not even Pastor Callahan. There was an unspoken understanding, this part of the story wasn't for cameras. It was sacred. The boy watched him go with an expression too ancient for his age. No pride. No triumph. Just patience. As if he'd seen this before. Maybe he had. Back at the edge of the crowd, silence fell like a blanket. No one knew what to say. For once, the man who had always had the last word had exited without one. The crowd lingered, waiting for something, anything. A signal. A miracle. A return. None came. Hours passed. The news vans packed up. People drifted back to town, minds spinning with theories. Had Trump gone mad? Had he been converted? Was it an act, a publicity stunt, or something real? Everyone wanted to know. But nobody did. Not for days. Then, on the third morning, a letter appeared. Not an email. Not a tweet. A letter. Handwritten. Delivered to Pastor Callahan's front steps in an unmarked envelope. No postage. No signature. Just a single sheet, folded clean and precise. The pastor read it aloud to the small group that had gathered at the church, and later he'd read it again to the larger crowd at Sunday service. And then again, when the world demanded to hear it. It said this. I came to Marlow expecting to find a crowd who'd forgotten how to listen. Instead, I found a boy who had never stopped speaking truth. I looked in a mirror and saw who I had become. But more importantly, I saw what I still could be. I will not return to the stage. I will not seek another throne. Because what I saw in that mirror wasn't just myself, it was the reflection of a world I helped shape. And now I walk a different path. If redemption is real, it's quiet. If change is possible, it must begin when the cameras turn off. Don't follow me. Find the mirror. DJT. The letter spread like wildfire. It was dissected, debated, doubted. Some called it fake. Others swore by it. Some pundits mocked it as the ultimate branding twist, while spiritual leaders called it a modern parable. But the town of Marlow knew what they'd seen. They didn't need proof. They had the moment. And the boy? He was never seen again. Not in Marlow. Not in the state. Not in any crowd, photo, or follow-up story. But sometimes, when the wind blew just right and the light hit the cornfields at dusk, people said they saw a figure standing at the edge. Still. Watching. Waiting for the next soul brave enough to walk into the field alone. Because the truth never shouts. It waits.